So, coming here today, I did expect to see maybe a humpback whale, maybe a resident killer whale, maybe a transient, maybe a gray whale, maybe a minke whale. Well, if I had come here 20 years ago and I was invited, I wouldn't even have bothered looking out. The whales weren't here. Outside of the southern residents, and of course their numbers are low, but they haven't really changed all that much. The probability of seeing a southern resident today is about the same as it was in the past. The numbers are down a bit more for a number of reasons. But something is clearly changed here. So, I don't know how many people appreciate just looking out here. Here we have the Strait of Georgia, and at one point in the late 1800s, there were 3 whaling stations. So it's Hornby, Texada, and Cortez, so it's Blubber Bay. And of course they weren't the first, but they had sailing ships at the time. And they took, we figure, probably fewer than 100 in about a 13-year period. So it didn't really work out that well for them. And they were whaling humpback whales, is what they were taking. And we know that prior to them, the First Nations were killing humpback whales up in these areas. And they used shells and other things to herd them into some of the bays where they could take them. So there's a long history of whaling here. Round about 1905, we had whaling stations being set up on the outside of Vancouver Island. Seychelles was one spot, and I think the second one. We were 2 sites just outside, and it was the Pacific Whaling Company that was whaling. And they were whaling in the summertime, and they had this great idea that they should move people to the Strait of Georgia to continue whaling in the fall and winter time. And so they brought their whaling crew over, and they set up the whaling station near Nanaimo at, I think it's called Piper's Lagoon, is where they set it up. And what you may not realize is that we had a very healthy population of humpback whales here. Probably over 100. They came back every year. So those sailing schooners didn't do all that much damage to them. But once they moved the steam-powered ships, exploding harpoons, it's going to be a very different game. In fact, what was interesting is that in 1905 we had the very first whale watching company. Actually, it wasn't a whale watching company. It was a steamship that was sailing out from Vancouver, taking passengers to Bowen Island. Because humpback whales were there every year up until January, and they were feeding around Bowen Island. They were up in Howe Sound. Well, the person running the steamship, in fact, I found an old photograph, and he called his ship, I think the Bolena was the name of his ship that he used to bring the passengers up to Bowen, to go effectively whale watching. I'm talking 1905. Well, the captain of this ship got later what was going to happen, and he got really concerned. And he wrote a letter to his member of parliament. And I happened to write down what he said. Because I don't have a good captain ship voice, I've asked Captain Charles to step in. So this is written by Captain Cates in 1907.
Captain Cates said, "It is only natural to say that everything that lives should be allowed a certain amount of protection. And I might say that by extermination of these whales from the waters of Howe Sound, it would seriously interfere with our local trade."
So what I find really interesting is that this was over 100 years ago. And clearly the appreciation for conservation, the value of all life, we've got one people, not many more, recognizing it. And they also tried to appeal to the politician by saying this has got economic consequences too, as well. Unfortunately, it fell on deaf ears. In 3 years' time, they killed every last humpback whale. It's taken 100 years for them to come back. And so now, as I'm out, and I'm not sure if we've got many, I don't see any kids here, but I think for the kids, there would be categories like that. You may look at that and say, you know, well, of course humpback whales are here. Everybody knows they're here. But when I arrived in Vancouver, there were no humpback whales here. They've only been coming into the strait in the past 10 years. And now the whale watching companies, that's become one of the mainstays. And they're fascinating whales to watch. They got those huge pectoral fins that are like your arms going down to your knees, just gangly. They're aerobatic. This past week at Howe Sound, they were doing lots of reaches, and you could take photos as though you're in Hawaii. One of the interesting things with these whales is, one reason is take them 100 years is that the knowledge about where to come essentially passed from mother to son and daughters. Because yes, they're born either in Mexico or Hawaii, they're going to come with their mothers, and they're going to be brought to traditional feeding areas. But of course, your island and all the others here, this has been quite it's almost like a dam to get through. But once a few humpback whales have come through and discovered this very rich feeding area just beyond, and we have, of course, had humpback whale sightings at East Point have come in. But they're really going up into the straits and up into those northern more reaches, such as Howe Sound and further up around Cortez, where some of those former whaling stations once were, and where First Nations were getting humpback whales traditionally. So that's been one of the good news stories. Is gray whales, another species which are coming in on occasion, but this is not a prime feeding area outside of maybe the springtime during that migration when they come into Boundary Bay. But often they're coming in very poor condition and hungry. So it looks as though the population of humpback whales that are here in the strait, they're probably, their genetic origin or the lineage is Mexico. And there seem to be two core breeding populations. There's the core Hawaiian one, which typically comes up to about the north end of Vancouver Island, all the way up to Alaska. And then we have the Mexican one, which is not recovered as well. The Mexican one, where perhaps it's something to do with the breeding areas, they've not done as well, but they are showing some signs of increasing. And so it appears that of that group, we may well in BC now have a population of about 2,100 humpback whales in BC. So one of the amazing stories on humpbacks has been that when commercial whaling ended, so it was stopped in BC 1967, and the population has since increased in number. So they were an endangered species. They became a threatened species in Canada as conditions improved. There's now about 21 to 22,000.
Really?
So the population now in Canada is considered to be a species of special concern. In the North Pacific, there's over 21,000 humpback whales. That's more whales than there were before we estimate commercial whaling, or there when commercial whaling started. And so in one respect, humpback whales in the North Pacific have recovered in terms of what was in BC, because it appears that, at least in this region, most of that was coming out of the Mexico area. That population hasn't done as well, but it's still increasing. So humpback whales really are one of the success stories. And we are literally seeing them now all over the coast. And I'd be very surprised if there's a single person here who has not seen one now somewhere in this local area.